Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant, subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
The minute you walked in the joint.
Well, I think it's a sex worker song.
So
So
it does feel empowering in that way.
Have you seen the one where it's done by a bunch of buff guys? Oh my God. Okay. I mean, my lechery comes out and like something fierce.
I could tell you were a man of distinction. Welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. This is a podcast for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Jacqueline Misla.
Hi, I'm Effy Blue, and on this episode, we'll be talking about kink with Midori. Dan Savage dubbed Midori as the Supernova of Kink. She contains a multitude of identities. Midori is a shibari artist who wrote the first English language book on Japanese bondage, an author of several other books, an educator, a TED speaker, and more. Welcome, Midori.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I know you're in the city every now and then, and we grab you and you teach for us and you talk to us. So we really appreciate you, and we consider you as the friend of the fox.
I am so happy to be here. You guys do cool stuff.
I'm glad we have lots of questions.
We do. We have questions. Yeah. I want to first. So we know you, and we talk about you a lot, and you've been a part of a contributor to Curious Fox for a few times for a few years, and I still I haven't really heard like your background personally, where you come from and how you got here. So I also want to start there. I want to start with you as the you as Midori as the person, and then we're going to shift into what you know most about, which is kink and bondage, and I want to hear all about your thoughts and your wisdom around that. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Okay. Where do you want me to start?
So what's your background, Dori? Where are you from?
Okay. Born and raised in Japan, and I came over to the U.S. as a teenager. Went to university over here. Go Bears. Went to Cal Berkeley, and ended up in San Francisco. Crossed the Bay Bridge in my little Volkswagen after school, and then after college, and then ended up in San Francisco. Now that's where a lot of my background, unbeknownst at the time, because you never know what the future will bring. There I was, young woman in the bloom of my own agency and sexuality. Now we're talking about the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and I end up in San Francisco, ready to explore into my own sexuality. But what's happening in the late 80s, early 90s in San Francisco? The HIV pandemic. So a dark cloud of grief and death over this city as I'm coming into my own life force, right? And, I'm a relatively clueless young woman, but along the way, as I'm exploring, and I ended up going out and exploring things like went to strip joints and went to swingers clubs and went to like erotic poetry reading and goth clubs and punk clubs and industrial clubs and this, that, and the other. Tried things. I definitely consider myself a trisexual, as in I'll try it.
I love that.
Yeah. So, but along the way, I ended up meeting people who believed that human sexuality is a part of the facet and the fabric of who we are, and to be able to make decision that's individually right based upon the best possible information that is out there, that is a humane thing, that human sexuality is part of expression of one's human rights. So I fell in with a group of people who were explorers and people who wanted to make right by the world. So instead of the darkness and the grief, to imagine like green buds coming up in a charred landscape. So eventually this would be called the sex positive movement, but in that time it wasn't. And I fell in with a group of people, and I was exploring personally as well as engaging in sex positive, I would call it, I guess it's activism. Yeah. I didn't consider myself, I'm an activist, but we did things like, I was trained by San Francisco Sex Information. So we went through the whole SAR training, right? Ended up staffing the phone, because back then phone, for sexuality information. We'd also go out to sex clubs or parties or etc. and do live safer sex demos as a way by which to engage in smarter sex. So I have a background as a sexuality educator and training in it on top of my college degree and all that.
So it sounds like there's always been some sort of alignment between your exploration and education, that as you were learning, you were also creating spaces for other people to learn.
Yes, though at that time I just didn't think about it that way. I was sharing. So instead of being a top down, it was a horizontal. It's like, hey, here's the thing I know, or here's the thing I learned. Let me share this with you.
Yeah.
And along the way, okay, so in college, I got genital herpes. Like, 1 out of 4 sexually active adults. And for those of you out there who have genital herpes, it's 1 out of 4. It is something that is entirely manageable, and I actually credit my herpes as making me smarter sexually, because it gave me, it gave me a reason to talk about safer sex and boundaries. And in a time when it was HIV and AIDS, herpes was like, it was an easy way to open up a conversation. So I have now made friends with my herpes in a way that it reminds me if I'm too stressed out, I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm not taking care of myself. My herpes tells me, hey, lady, you should get some more sleep. And that shift in the attitude, because I will admit that the first nurse that I saw around this, like, totally sex shamed me. Not okay. Anyhow, that also added to the, hey, I had this experience. And then, of course, I went academic on that to find out about what is this thing that I have. And so I started sharing it with others around, well, not sharing the virus, but sharing the knowledge.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. There's been an element of sharing. And I never thought of it as the formality of education. But rather add a little bit more information and I'll share it with you.
More like community, sharing within community.
The thing that you said that also stood out for me is I always say sexual expression is a part of self-expression. So if you want to be fully self-expressed, you also need to get in touch with your sexual side. And regardless of what it is, find ways of expressing it, and hearing you say it's actually a human right, it's actually the humane thing to do, that just like elevated that for me even more, to sort of say it's a human right to be able to express your sexuality, because it is so part of us. That also just resonated with me. It's important.
And I do want to add to that sexuality, so there's sometimes when people are talking about sex positivity, there's this assumption that means that you're doing a lot of it and wanting it.
Having wild sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas actually sex positivity is about being positive about whatever decision you make that's best for you, which also means that there isn't you should be having this much sex.
Right.
Or,
absolutely.
And I want to make sure that sometimes,
it gets confused for sure.
Yeah. And for people who honor their boundary, or it's like, no, I actually enjoy monogamy, or I am choosing celibacy. That is also to be celebrated under the whole sex positive perspective.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, we cover asexuality a lot because of exactly that assumption. Like, if we're going to do some myth busting in a minute, and this is a good place to start, that the myth is that if you're sex positive, that means you're having wild sex, a lot of wild sex. But you're right. It could be anywhere. You know, you could be celibate, you could be asexual, and still be sex positive. And that is a myth that needs busting.
I think what's interesting too about this concept of self-expression being humane and sexual expression coming in that is that there's so much shame that's wrapped around sexuality and kink in particular. And particularly, I think the folks who have conversations with us about being fearful of having conversations with their partners around wanting to try things, that if it's viewed for both parties through the lens of, well, this is a part of my humanity and my growth is to explore and to be curious and to create space for that curiosity, that lens allows a level of permission that then does not warrant shame. And so I love that. I'm going to take that back with me, that idea of self-expression and sexuality as a form of honoring our humanity.
Yeah. So you were an educator. How did you get, or you were sharing the information that became to you? How did you then, like, what were your signs of interest towards BDSM? Like, what was BDSM and bondage? When did it start calling you, and how did you rise to that call?
See, I get asked that a lot, and I actually find it a really difficult question to answer because I never made a distinction. And I don't make a distinction around BDSM is somehow separate than sex. I actually just thought it was like, you know, adventurous, make-believe, fun, creative sex. And I figured that everybody had some level of like creative, fun, make-believe play, and that people were just modest and polite and didn't talk about it. See, that's my Japanese side, is that there are things that you do privately that you don't necessarily talk about. But of course, everybody does it. Was my assumption. So I never came out of a kink closet because there was no closet. There was just like, ooh, sex. Okay.
Right. And all the beautiful things. that fall under that.
Please.
Yeah. It's sex with tools. And okay, tangent to tools and sex, whether it's like kink toys or vibrators. Do you hear the bit about, sometimes I'll hear people say, oh, sex is natural, you should not need sex toys.
I know people who are like against it. Toys, yeah.
So I have an argument on that, in that we are fundamentally a tool using species. Okay. What aspect of life as Homo sapiens do we not use tools? So imagine you have a stick. You have a stick, okay? As in early hominid. I have a stick. I use a stick to poke at my food. I have a stick. I poke at my enemy. I have a stick. I poke at my bits. I mean, using tools, it's a human imperative. So if we're actually not using tools and engaging in our creativity, we are actually dishonoring imperative as a tool using species.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know. Yeah, it's a thing. Like people make it an ego issue a lot of the time. Like if you're using tools, you're not good enough, and there's a lot of narrative about it. But this is a great,
it's so much more
fun. Yeah, no, exactly. And this is I love this. I love this reasoning. You know,
Yeah.
it's human. You know, it's human.
Yeah, name me a facet of humanity, of human expression, or just existence that we do not use tools.
Right. Are there same people eating with their hands? Are they right? Those people who are making those arguments. Are they
Fire,
void of tools?
cooking, fire. I wear glasses. These are tools. You know,
For sure. Yeah. And why not?
And it's also it's a matter of amplifying the experience. You know, I think that's part of it too. Is in the curiosity. It's in the play. It's in the amplification. Let's use all the things.
I drink tea. And, you know, I don't go to the tea plant and just eat the buds. It requires boiling the water to like make the tea.
Yeah. So then, okay, so I have another question then.
Yeah.
If there was no kink closet and kind of it felt like no integration, so there was seamlessness in the moving into the BDSM or continue on in doing that, there was a seamlessness around education because you're always community sharing. Were the arts always a part of the work? Because so much of what you do now is focused on art and the beauty of that and the combination of all these things within the lens of art. So I'm wondering if that was always a part of the origin story for you.
I've been asked since, you know, when was I an artist? And I was like, huh? And my answer to that is, I think I was about 5 when, you know, I was doing like arts and craftsy stuff, and I was left alone to like do arts and crafts. My mom comes home and finds me presenting this painting, this glittery, interestingly shaded painting. And then I told her that I found eyeshadow, mind you, my mom's favorite eyeshadow. I found out that oil paint is made out of pigment and oil. So I pulverized her eyeshadow, mixed it with vegetable oil, and painted it. And bless her for not being pissed at me. I remember wondering why she had a funny look on her face as she was complimenting me on my creativity. Like, why does she look pained? I don't understand. She's saying I did good, but she looks unhappy. I don't understand.
It's the origins of both pleasure and pain and art.
You're like, oh, I get it now. Funny.
But yeah, I say yes to a lot of things because it feels good in the gut. And look where I ended up.
Yeah.
Oops.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
You're here as well. Midori, do you have any siblings?
Nope, only child.
Me too. And you came over here with your mom?
No, actually, I came over here to. I'm Japanese and German American. I came over here and lived with my German American grandmother.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
What a combination, German American. Yeah,
and I wear Italian shoes, so hey.
Amazing. And what was that like coming over from? Did you speak any English? I'm asking because I'm an immigrant too, so I'm kind of curious about that.
I spoke a very family pidgin. I didn't know how to read or write English, but I had been hearing it, and my grandmother had me watching Sesame Street. So as an adult, I had this moment of realizing I could count to 10 in Spanish, and I didn't know why. And then I realized, oh my God, it was Sesame Street. Yeah. And I remember watching Maria on Sesame Street. And because growing up in Japan, I didn't have a concept of Latinx, but she was the person that looked closest to me. So I'm like, okay, here's this person. 'Cause I don't think there were Asians on Sesame Street back then. Not yet. So I remember looking at Maria and thinking, I can relate to her.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think representation is so important. To your point of being able to see people who look like you, sound like you, have experiences like you are so important. And you have had such an impact on that in bringing Japanese bondage and rope to, first of all, the English language, and to bring it into the States and translating some of those things, but also representing multiculturalism and intersectionality within the sex positive world. And so I want to name that first, and also just talk a little bit about what your experience of that, of bringing representation and bringing your culture into this work.
Thank you. Like so many things that I do, in the moment I'm doing it, I have absolutely no awareness that I'm doing it. Yeah. So as an Asian American woman who freely talks about sexuality, who is freely exploring around kink and various things. Oh, by the way, I do want to make a note here that just because I'm exploring things doesn't mean I always enjoy everything. I explore and try things knowing that I might not like it. Okay, so for those of you out there who are explorers, it's okay to explore and decide that you don't like something or it's not for you now. That means your experimentation is a success. Success is not that you must like everything. Success is you understand yourself better. Okay? This is the nature of research, is you're not committed to an outcome, and this is the nature of explorer. You don't know what's going to be on the other side, but you commit to step out on the journey. So as an Asian American woman, and way back when I was exploring, it didn't feel like there were a lot of us Asian Americans out there who were, it's that whole immigrant story, right? That it takes several generations for the heritage and cultural background and behavior around gendered or social acceptable behavior to shift from the heritage culture to the new culture. Also, discussion around racism really wasn't happening. So exoticizing minorities, common. So yeah, did I encounter, hey, little Asian lady, walk on my back? I got that shit all the time. Or you must be dragon lady, or you must be natural. Oh, Asian women are great because they're so submissive. I'm like, have you ever met an Asian grandmother or an auntie? Because I slap you with a flip flop. Okay. Yeah.
Those are actually, I was just making a list of those things actually, that the things that you're really challenging, right? That as an Asian woman, that you are freely talking about sex and really indulging in it. You mostly dominant and you're queer, and all of those things are against all the stereotypes that we hold around Asian women.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you're really sort of challenging the status quo across the spectrum.
And the funny thing is, I didn't set out to challenge anything. I didn't even know I was challenging anything. I was just being me.
Well, but that's the beauty of it, right? Is that when you are authentically you, then you do challenge the systems of conformity. And Effy and I have had this conversation because we, at our last Consider This, we had a panel that was talking about porn. And a part of that discussion was about how indie porn is allowing for more representation.
Yay.
And we were having a discussion around the value of representation, but also to your point that sometimes then, is that representation, or do people use that to exoticize or to stereotype? Like, are we searching in, Latina woman or Asian woman because we are looking for representation, or because there's a stereotype that we have associated with it? And so I can understand your challenge in pushing back on those things, on those boundaries, or pushing back on those stereotypes.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, what I am noticing today is that, and I hear from women and men as well, that because they saw me, that they came to an event, or they knew that I was going. So unknowingly, I somehow become
you're like a Pied Piper.
I guess so. Yeah.
Well, you create the space.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the representation and bringing that aspect. At what point did you make the decision, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to utilize this platform and I'm going to do this work, where it became a decision?
I had been teaching locally in San Francisco because there were peer-to-peer teaching opportunities, and I'd been teaching workshops, and then the editor and publisher of Greenery Press approached me and said, you want to write this book on Japanese bondage? Now, mind you, in the late 90s, there were only a handful of us doing this. And
Sorry, Greenery Press, that's
Greenery Press publishes a whole lot of kink how-to books and BDSM how-to books. So Janet Hardy,
exactly.
Janet Hardy.
My brain is like, yeah, Janet Hardy, of course. Yeah.
Janet Hardy approached me and said, write a book. And I said, okay. And she persuaded me. And so that's how it came to be. Now, mind you, it wasn't hugely popular then. I had to do a lot of explaining about, what's Japanese bondage or Japanese rope bondage or shibari. It's interesting today. Simultaneously, there's I get the sense that people think it's brand new or that it's been around forever. Now, 20, 25 years ago, there were only a handful of us, to a point that the publisher figured that it would only be a niche book, maybe sell 5,000 copies. So she made a print run of 8,000 copies and figured there'd be leftovers. It sold out in a week.
Wow.
And it has been in continuous print since.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And I had no idea, again, at the moment that it would be a cultural watershed moment. Yeah.
So that's a good invitation, because most of our listeners are curious and new to this. So can you explain what is Japanese bondage?
Okay. So Japanese rope bondage is a particular style of kinky bondage play that has romanticized and stylized way of tying each other up. There's certain patterns around it. Now, today I think some people think that it has to be slow, complicated, and difficult. It doesn't have to be at all. If it's so slow, complicated, and difficult to learn, the person teaching it is not doing their job. Fundamentally, it's tying each other up in a particular vague sense of aesthetics and then getting your shag on. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, can we go into some other definitions?
Sure.
Okay, so we've been saying kink, but let's start from the beginning. So how would you define kink play?
Kink or BDSM?
Yes.
Now, most people take the word BDSM and break it down to bondage, discipline, sadomasochism. That's really not a definition. All right. So my definition of kink and BDSM is childhood joyous play with adult sexual privilege and cool toys.
Yes.
Or cops and robbers with fucking.
Yes, I'll say yes to all of that.
Yeah. And let me break that on down because childhood joyous play. There's something that happens in adulthood, like everything's supposed to be serious. Well, children are geniuses of engaging in play. Now, at this point, some people are like, hey, I hear people going, don't sexualize my childhood. I'm not sexualizing our childhood. We're child joying our adulthood because, man, adulting is really boring. Adulting is, oh my God, taxes and bills and, get to work on time and navigate the world. And adulting is really boring. And there's a lot that's not creative and not expressive. And, we got to suck it up and be adults. But why do we have to do that all the time?
Yeah.
It also tends to numb the creative potential. And I'll hear people saying, oh, I'm not creative. No. Just by the fact that you can take your thoughts and put it into a sentence, that's an act of creation. Humans are creative by nature. We get it beaten out of us that only certain people are creative, right? No, we all are. When we decide, and in some areas maybe we're more or less creative. Sure, but humans are creative. Language is creative. Communication is creative.
Yeah. And I think in some areas that creativity, yes, some people, some think that they don't have it, and in some areas it's squashed. And I feel like sexuality, sexual expression is definitely one of those areas. Even if you're the most creative, you get told the noise, as we call it, from society is like, that's not the place to be creative. That's not the place to put your energy. That's not the place to put your curiosity. That's not the place to, that's just what the noise says. And there's no reason why that should be the case.
You know what's interesting about that too is that I do believe that in the status quo there are roles that are being played. Because as a woman, for example, the role that I'm supposed to play is submissive. I'm supposed to allow something to happen to me and be joyful about everything that is happening to me.
But not too joyful.
Right, exactly. The appropriate amount. Exactly. Well, joyful that they're having a good experience. Not necessarily that I need to have a good experience. And as a younger person in my sexuality, I was role playing that role. So there was, it necessarily wasn't fun and games, but there was certainly some gaming that was happening, and that I was playing this established role that I thought I could have. Whereas the games I can play now are much more rooted in my authenticity and more fun. But that's what's so interesting about it is that we're told, not to bring creativity, but inherent in it we are, because we are not bringing ourselves into it. And so we're pretending to be something else as opposed to bringing joyful creativity, which I think is what you're sharing, and which I think also busts the myth that BDSM is all painful. And that kink is about pain and not about play and pleasure and fun and creativity.
So among the three of us, as well as you listeners, how many of us like to play chasey games when we were kids?
Still do. I'm actually just organizing a tag game for adults.
Awesome. Okay, so if we like playing chasey games when we were kids, how many of us like to do the chasing, and how many of us like to get chased, right? And if you're a fast kid who likes to get chased, you're gonna slow down
a little bit, right?
You're gonna slow down so the other kid might catch you. Now, did you like to play house? Did you like to play superhero? Did you like to, what kind of superhero did you play? All of this, and then you add to it adult sexual privilege. And what do I mean by adult sexual privilege? That we, as adults, that we have access to privacy. That is a privilege, right? That we have agency of our body, usually, as I take a deep breath, and legal boundaries of that are tenuous. However, the right to our own body, right? That adult privilege, that I got a little spending money, that I can go into some place like Pleasure Chest and or Purple Passion here in New York and get stuff, and that I can have condoms in my purse, and in most places, but not all places, that I will not be arrested. But just so you know, that there are places where if you do have sexual material on your person, as a woman, you could get arrested. Yeah. Ain't cool. Okay. So adult sexual privilege, all of these things that we take for granted, that I can go and buy a vibrator, that I get to have an orgasm. These are privileges, right? That so often we have to fight for just the civil rights around being a sexual entity and being a human, right? So the strategies of joy seeking in the child's strategy of joy seeking and interacting with people you like, add to that adult sexual privilege and wanting of others' sensual company and cool toys. I talked about tools as a human imperative. BDSM.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sure. Yeah. And you had done a workshop for us at some point where you helped people think about their internal dark side and the internal narrative and the things that we're trying to hide, and how do we actually leverage that in the play space. And as you both were talking about, the game of tag, I think as an adult, my version of that is probably in manipulation, is in conflict, where I'm like, I'm mad, I'm going to go to the other room, and now you have to chase me and like make me feel better. And that's an unhealthy way, I think, of playing tag, where I think what you were sharing in that workshop and some of what I heard in your work is we can look at some of those manipulative, dark, maybe shameful pieces of our behavior and be thoughtful about how to incorporate that in a healthy way in play.
Yeah. I mean, play and that, just to add to what you're saying, that it is also a place of therapy. It's a place of play. It's a place of therapy. It's a
No. I'm gonna push back on that. I'm gonna push back on that because I will hear about how BDSM can be therapy. There's a difference between therapy and therapeutic.
Sure, right? I meant therapeutic.
Yeah, yes. And I actually want to make that distinction for those of you out there. Therapy is with an objective towards change, right? Kink is an objective to fun. If you go into kink, BDSM, or sex with your partner with the objective to fix something, at the basic level, you are not here. You are in a future. You are invested in an outcome. You are now not present with the person, and you're always going to be measuring your experience against some sort of a planned outcome.
That's powerful,
right? For sure. Yeah.
So when I hear people going, "Oh, BDSM is therapy,"
that makes sense.
I mean, I think I'm so glad you made that distinction, right? It's interesting because when I first said it, I thought of it as personal therapy. So like really sort of looking at your dark side and having places that you can express it in a safe, consensual way, that that is in some way therapeutic to who you are and getting to know you and dealing with some of those dark sides. Now, what you're explaining is kind of potential, like almost like couples therapy or therapy for the relationship. And it's interesting to say, like, actually, you don't want to engage in that to fix things or if there's a power imbalance, a true power imbalance, or you really want to sort of engage in it for fun as being like the prime directive.
But that distinction is powerful for me, of not trying to bring something to it or a means to an end, but just in the curiosity and the play of it, going through it together. Yeah. But it also makes me think about another myth that we potentially want to bust, which is that kink has something to do with trauma as a child, that you're trying to work something through now. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And let's talk about some of the myth that's out there on that kink is people who are enjoy kinky things somehow must have had childhood trauma or early trauma, or that there's something wrong with them or something that is nefarious. But if we look at this as tag
play
or cops and robbers or creative expression, no, it's humans play with exploration of power and play with explorations of intensities of sensation, right? So the idea that there's the idea that there is trauma. Now, if we accept that kink is part of creative experience, if we assume that kink is an expression of creative sexuality, right? Then to assume that kink must come from trauma means that creativity comes from trauma, and that makes no sense at all. Just from a purely rationalist perspective, that makes no sense. Theater. I mean, there's a reason why kink.
Theaters.
Yeah. There's a reason why in kink play, the sexy time we have in kink is called a scene, and that's the language of theater. And theater is a way by which to explore the facets of human psyche. People who go see Shakespeare are not coming from a place of trauma.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things definitely came out for me. That theater was the first thing. And the other thing is the fact that you're looking at different sensations, right? Everybody who rides a roller coaster, people who, surf, like people who are like
foodies,
like people who seek sensation. It's like we don't say it's those people. You must come from trauma. We were like, oh, amazing, you have this thing, or on the extreme case of people who jump out of planes, like we don't like cast them all.
That.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's not about just about trauma. Here's what I've experienced, and I would love to hear if that's accurate with. So you have way more exposure than I do, but having sort of polled as the nerd, the person that I am in this subject, I found that there are three groups of people that really sort of the kink resonates with them. One are people who are kind of born, I want to say born that way, like it's an instinct, internal instinct, and it's sort of seeking a particular type of play. So they're the people that are actually like finding the calling and they're following it. And it ends up being this like similar to you, this like elaborate theater-like sexual experiences and expressions. That's kind of one group of people. The other group of people who have met those people and they have, it doesn't offend them, and they like they get curious and they kind of engage, and they may or may not explore kink or BDSM in their own sort of, if they were to be left on their own. And there is a third group that have had some sort of either trauma or some sort of, if they come from like hyper-religious communities, that somewhere along their sexual developmental path, a pressure was put on and it kinked. It literally kinked and it got displaced into something else. So I find like those are the three main groups, and it's not just one of them, but a sort of people sort of fall into these buckets. How does that? What is your experience in that?
Maybe, but doesn't that reflect every aspect of life? I mean, one's relationship to money, food, health. I mean, terrible things happening to young humans' lives can get reflected into all sorts of ways. And yeah, if somebody is engaging in financial greed and financial cruelty, we don't look at them and say, oh, they must come from a place of trauma. No, we say they're successful. Right?
Yeah.
So
I'm interested if some of those people come from trauma. Actually,
this
is what I mean. That's right.
But as a whole with society,
right,
in terms of who we are shaming and who we are highlighting, that we are not. Yes, when it comes to sexuality, we're picking it apart in a way that we're not when it has to do with money, success, work.
Selfish, mean, cruel behavior when it comes to, say, aspects of finance or real estate is considered successful.
Yeah.
So now that's kind of weird, isn't it, when you stop and think about it?
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you said, Effie, that's interesting is that people do approach this topic differently. And I think one of the phrases within the sex positive world is this phrase of enthusiastic consent. And you have talked about engaged collaborative consent versus enthusiastic consent. So I'm
yes.
hoping you can explain that.
Okay, so talking about consent. Yes, way good. Okay, so that's a good start. And then the next step in this course has been, let's make it not just consent, because consent can be manipulated. Let's talk about enthusiastic consent. Okay, good. But I think today I want to talk about and move towards engaged collaborative consent. So what's the difference? All right. So enthusiastic consent, I might get hung up on that by, if I was somebody out there, enthusiastic consent. I must be enthusiastic about, right, let's say
Right,
going
hell
out,
no or hell yes.
Yeah,
right?
hell no or a hell yes. Now let's say, now you and I, you invite me to go out to sushi and I've never had sushi, right? I love sushi, so this is utterly fictional, completely fictional. All right.
Midori, would you like to come sushi with me?
Right. And I'm like, okay, at this point, if I'm to have enthusiastic consent, I have to have an idea about sushi. I need to be excited about it or know I like it. But if I've never had it, how can I be enthusiastic about it? And also, enthusiastic consent may, for many people, imply that if I'm enthusiastic, I must like it. If I like it, then whatever experience that we have, in the end, I must like it. But what if I didn't like it? Right? So enthusiastic's a lot of pressure on me.
For sure.
And a lot of pressure for you to find out that I'm really hell yeah. But what if it's, I want to have dinner with you. I want to try this new thing, but I want us to be open to the fact that I might not like it. All right. So engaged means, okay, I'm going to engage in this with you. I am clear that I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm with you. Okay. Collaborative. Now, in the collaborative, I might tell you that actually I have an egg allergy. So no egg. Okay. And I don't like brown rice. It's not an allergy. I just don't like it. Okay. So now we're engaging in collaboration because I'm setting out a couple of known things. So now we try sushi. I might love it. I might hate it. I might like just some of it. I might like the salmon, because I know I like lox and bagels, right? But maybe I didn't like the eel, because that was just weird. Actually, I love eel. But maybe, and so now it's not just a hell yeah, hell no, but we have engaged collaborative consent and we have nuance and we're not invested in the outcome other than let's spend time together. The only thing that we know for sure that I am hell yeah about is I want to spend time with you.
I love that description.
Yeah.
It does. It reframes it so much differently. Again, it keeps going back to curiosity and creativity and play and exploration. And so with that lens, when people, I imagine that people come to your workshops, come to your talks, come to your galleries and are excited or interested and at some point pull you aside and say, I'd love to introduce this to my partner. I'd love to play with them. I don't even know how to tell them that this is what I'm thinking about. Talk to me a little bit about the reframing work that you help them do to get to the place of being able to talk about this.
So in reframing, that whole idea that it's childhood joyous play with adult sexual privilege and cool toys makes it a heck of a lot easier. And I advise what I call the sandwich method. The sandwich method is take your regular good sex. Yeah, you want to, and you know what you like in your regular good sex. And then just introduce one little element in the middle of it. So instead of having like a giant, multi-stacked Subway sandwich kind of thing, let's go for cheese sandwich, right? Where the bread is your regular good sex. So let's say that our regular good sex, and notice the phrasing is whatever it is your regular good sex is, not everybody's. It's your regular good sex. So let's say our regular good sex is, we're making out, we're snuggling, there's a little nipple play going on, a little fingering the bits, and then there's a little fucky, couple of orgasms, I hope, maybe, don't be invested in it, and then pant a little bit, and I need a shower. And preferably chocolate. Okay. So let's say that's our regular good sex, yeah? So if I were to say, oh my God, you said, here's all the things that I want to do. Here's like these 27 things I found on the internet that I want to do. Not only is that overwhelming, that is a recipe for complications, fights, disasters, dropped expectations, and yeah. But what if we just picked one thing? And I often recommend for a lot of people, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, blindfold. So let's say that we're making out and a little bit of nipple play, and then right before I know that I'm going to be playing with your bits with my hands, I put on a blindfold. Okay. And then continue on with the regular good sex. And so now we've introduced one variable. And then in the end, it's, all of our fun, regular good sex. It's a common misunderstanding that you're supposed to be able to produce this like high production value, Oscar winning, Tony Award winning, like props and technique. No, don't make it so complicated. The first time you're cooking, you're not going to do a 17-course Thanksgiving meal.
I have a question. So that's kind of the practical aspect of it.
Yeah.
How about, which I find that what gets in the way before even the how is the shame around it.
Yeah.
So like how to find, how do you sort of create, nurture, find the space and the time to sort of sit your partner down and be like, listen, here are some desires I have, and I want to, like, they're maybe they're a little outside our usual, our normal sex. Would you be interested? Like, what do you recommend to people how they can get over the shame and how to make that initial just conversation around it?
So all that we've been talking about so far around creativity and play, focusing upon that, and also remember to keep you and your partner's pleasure in the center of it. When I say pleasure, it, all of these things that one could do in kink, it's not about achieving, delivering a task achievables. No, it is in pursuit of a shared mood. So if I were to say, hey, Effy, I have this thing that I want to try with you because I want us to feel good. Putting us in the center of it. That all of these explorations are about us, as opposed to, here would be a bad example. Okay. Effy, I want to suck toes. You have toes. I want to be spanked. Spank me. That doesn't put us in the center of it, right? And that this is an exploration focused upon our joy. Put our shared joy in the middle and think of these activities as accessories.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I'm thinking of so many times where people have said, well, I want my partner to be more dominant, or I want them to be more submissive, or I want them to play this role, as opposed to I want us to have this experience. It's about I want them to do this, or I want to do this.
Right. And goes back to what we were saying about collaboration. It's an invitation for collaboration, not invitation of, can I do this to you or can you do this to me? It's more like, can we collaborate and play? And what you were saying about like, what do you want to... What do you want to do? What I want to do? I don't, I'm allergic to eggs, having
and
that
even the fun of that conversation, the playfulness and the anticipation of like the discussion around it.
For sure.
So before having this conversation with the other person, mull it over as to, is what I'm saying putting our shared time and joy in the middle of it? Spank me is not so. As opposed to saying that I think it might be exciting if you if you could arouse my ass by reddening it a bit, and maybe you'll feel like badass powerful. Why don't we try a little spanking? Maybe it could be fun for us, as opposed to a demand.
Sure.
What are your thoughts around play spaces, parties and scenes outside of two folks and how to enter into those spaces? Because I think sometimes that's people want to go to a kink party or to an event.
Yeah, it's for some people. It is not for everyone. And there's sometimes, people hear about these parties and feel like that is where kink should be done. That's not necessarily where kink needs to be done. It is for some people. It is not for everyone. And it's probably not the place to start your exploration. A conversation with your sweetie. And if you are going to go to a play party, now here's my advice that I give to my students. If you're going to go to a sexually social environment, okay? If you're going to go to a sexually or sensually social environment, have as an objective to be a good observer and learn about yourself and maybe make a friend. And I will often challenge my students to go and not play. Go and not play. Be a nice guest. Have some conversations. Reflect upon your feelings. Have feelings. But do nothing.
Yeah.
And somebody might say, "Oh, but I'm at a sex party. I'm supposed to be having sex." No, you're not. You're only obligated to be a good guest. Follow the basic guideline of being a polite, civilized individual, which also means don't touch without asking, because you won't do that out in the world.
And it's also, that could be a game in and of itself. I've talked about the marshmallow trick that, back in the day they did studies with children around patience and marshmallows, but can you be around it and not touch? Like the first time out, can you go? And the game of it is to just observe and to take all of that sexual energy and work that out on your own at some point. Like that could be part
Use
of
it
the
for
fun.
fantasy, photo for fantasy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what if you want to get better at these things? So, I'm thinking about myself. I think about Effy. We are very high achievers. So we think about, I want to play in this way and I want to learn how to do that well. And I want to engage in a way that feels fun. There are workshops and there are things. So for example, Curious Fox, you'll be facilitating for us on feminine dominance coming up on March 17th. And you have a Fort of Femme weekend that happens on both coasts. And so I'm interested in that a little bit, particularly around, and part of the work that I do specifically is with women and women and helping them own their power. And so this is a manifestation of that. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
So workshops and things?
So like workshops and also then specifically with those who are interested in feminine dominance. That has nothing to do with gender identity necessarily, but what that looks like in that space.
Yeah, let's actually talk about that bit, because the Art of Feminine Dominance is a class I teach, and it is open to all genders, orientations, and the partners are encouraged. Now, the key here is it's feminine dominance, and I'm predicating that not upon the gender that one identifies with or walks through the world, but rather engaging in their own feminine power in a time-bracketed, temporally limited state for the purpose of play, which means that you can be of any gender or gender expression and explore that within play, right? So I want to be really clear that it is not the art of female dominance, but art of feminine dominance. And this celebrates the fact that we are a fluidly expressing species, right? And desire and power come in a lot of different ways, just in the same single person's body, right? So in the Art of Feminine Dominance, we focus upon the psychology, the archetypes, the multiplicity of expression in that, and the things to focus upon. Now, there's a difference between the practical skills of how to use your tools. Learn how to use the tools, what I call the wacky pokey bindy things. And it doesn't have to be complicated, right? You can keep it simple. Okay. Understanding the emotional motivation around this, of playing with engagement of power and authority, or surrender and belonging, right? So taking those workshops and exploring possibilities and understanding yourself and your partner's desires, super helpful. Don't just learn how to use the tools. Understand the why you're using the tools and the effect that you and yours wants to create for your shared joy, or what kind of mood you want to go to.
Sure. Yeah. I think sometimes we get caught up in the theater of it, and we don't necessarily, consider the deeper dynamics at play. And I think when I hear you say that, it just pauses you. Sometimes we get too hung up on the tools and the outfits but my two big takeaways is that one is to really center the pleasure and joy in the middle, and the other is that think about it beyond the tools.
So for example, we were talking about rope bondage, right? How many ways could I tie you up? And I'm talking ways, I don't mean the shape, I mean emotionality. I could be rough and nasty. Grr. I could also wrap you and cocoon you and hold you and embrace you in my ropes. I could tease you with the ropes. I could comically annoy you and be, there is such a thing as a bratty top, right? I could use the rope as a way by which to devour you. I could use and symbolically to consume you. I could use the rope to take possession of you. I could use the ropes by a way to free you of your burdens. It's still ropes.
And I've heard you talk about that before, and I think it makes so much sense to me. This, like, what mood do we want to be in tonight? I know that's conversations that I've had with my partner. Like, do we feel cozy? Do we feel ravenous? Do we feel playful? But having that conversation and ensuring that both people are in the same space, or if not, then how do we collaborate around the distinction, or where we are in our spaces?
And sometimes it's we're in different moods. Let's go watch a movie.
Right. Not tonight. Totally get that.
Well, and the thing is, after a movie or a dinner or go to the gym, your mood might change.
True. Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we always say about the permission, inspiration and permission. I think what you the different scenarios that you went through with rope makes me think also allowing, like, checking in and allowing different moods to be expressed, right? Sometimes we get stuck, like sex is only ravenous, we only have sex when we're horny and ravenous and want to rip each other's clothes off. We don't allow ourselves, like, there's like comfy cozy sex and there is
lazy sex
and to change throughout the course of the activity. It can start off cozy and it leads to ravenous.
Totally. And just starting with a feeling and how we want to feel, what the mood, what the vibe, and being creative with it and feel inspired by it, and then to be authentic and really see one another and allow give permission to really fully express as who we are and how we feel. Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
And talk to me a little bit about the wild side sex, because we talked to think about the seductive art of Japanese bondage, but I don't think we talked about your other book.
Yeah, that's one of my other books, Wild Side Sex, the Book of Kink. And it's a series of essays. So if you like what I'm talking about here, I think you'll like my essays. There's a couple of sections of little simple how-tos, like how to use a this, how to use a that. But then there are essays around how do you explore, what does trust mean? Why does one engage in BDSM? What are some bad reasons to engage in BDSM? I even delve into what exactly is humiliation play? And why are people into it? And it's not what people think it is.
Ooh, do give us a teaser.
So there's humiliation out in the world, which is around making somebody, harming somebody and making somebody less than. Whereas erotic humiliation is about giving a temporary relief from the arbitrary and culturally defined performance of self. And the cognitive dissonance that's created by shedding the culturally defined performance of self. Like, you are a man, you should always be tough. You are a man, you should not wear pink, you should wear blue. Here, wear pink, it looks good on you. Oh my God, I actually like pink, but I'm having to have an internal conflict. Oh my God, I'm vaguely embarrassed, but I actually do like pink. Oh my God, that creates actually an increased heartbeat. It creates hyper presence. And that moment of discomfort, social discomfort, and uncomfortable emotion, but in that act of the temporary dismantling is humiliation play. And that's the nerdy way of saying what it actually is, right? So it's, while the word is the same, humiliation in the bedroom versus humiliation in the world, they're two totally different things. Yeah.
And to really understand that, it's so. I also am thinking all this stuff
Read
is also,
my book.
To understand about ourselves, and it's also just such an area of like insight and self-reflection, and I don't know, it's all the stuff that we love, and just to look at like what turns you on, what you're attracted to, and then deconstructing all that to understand what it means for you as a endless mine of self-knowledge.
Is there anything that you are particularly curious about and kind of thinking through, either in your talks, in your art, in your workshops right now?
Well, creative collaboration. In my artwork, I love collaborating with other creative entities, artists and makers and general folks. So yeah, I think creative collaboration. So in my teaching work, I'm giving tools to people to engage in their own creativity. In my artwork, I'm engaging in my own creativity. It's two sides of the same coin.
That makes sense. And I think that we recently did a workshop on threesomes, and Lola Jean facilitated that, and she spoke about approaching a threesome in the way of which it's like a collaboration. And Effy, you mentioned this on the podcast as well, that as opposed to adding someone in as a tool to manifest our couple vision, that it's the three of us potentially sitting down and co-collaborating and working on something together. And so all of this to me like just feels like it's all the same messages. And so I'm always astonished that no matter the theme, that no matter what the topic is, we always have the same. It's always know thyself, know what you need, know what you want, focus on your authenticity, focus on communication, focus on creating space together and collaborating. Like the themes are consistent throughout all this work.
And accept that the outcome is unknown.
Remain curious. Stay curious. Stay curious. Absolutely. Stay curious.
So if you want to learn more about Midori, there are a number of places. You can find her TEDx talk. You can you can log into FortFemme, Fortefemme.com and find out about the weekend workshops that take place. You can support us on Patreon, and the workshops and talks that she's done for Curious Fox are on there. If you are in or around New York on March 17th, 2020, she was going to be doing a workshop for us. And so you can come to that in Brooklyn. And are there any other ways?
Social media.
Finding social media.
So all the social media, just go to Planet Midori, Twitter, Instagram, Planet Midori. Also my other classes, I have a newsletter out there, FHP-inc.com. The website's all ancient. Sorry about that. But yeah,
we'll put these on the show notes as well.
Yeah, just look for me under Planet Midori.
Yes.
In the various social media, the usual places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while you're looking in the show notes, while you're down there, you know what you can do? You can like us and review us and share the podcast. Well, while you're down there, you can do lots of things. I like when you like me when you're down there. So like, review, share the podcast. It does make a difference. Hashtag change the noise is all that we are about. We're trying to create spaces that you can hear, listen to, read, attend, so that we can change the noise around us. Follow us on Curious Fox on Facebook and Instagram and Patreon. It's at We Are Curious Foxes. You can follow us in any of those spaces.
Exactly. And we're adding a new segment going forward. We are adding a segment where we are taking your questions. If you have a question that you'd like to explore on the show, give us a call. We went old fashioned. We have a phone line. It is 201-870-0063. That's 201-870-0063. Leave us your question, and we will, just so that you know, we will play the question in the show, and we'll answer it. Either it'll be Jackie or I, or if it makes sense for one of our interviewees, we'll bring it up and we'll answer it for you. That number again is 201-870-0063. 201-870-0063. As always, if you have other ideas and you want to reach out to us and give us some feedback, you can also email us at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. That is listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com.
I think that's it.
That's it for us. And stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.